Today I'm excited to share my first Ghostlore build with you. I used it to clear Hellgate level 6 without any issues. The AoE damage is incredible, and thanks to the consistent damage from our Poison Vial and Monsoon skills, we can melt bosses in seconds. Additionally, with the passives from the Adept and Exorcist classes, I have excellent survivability. I know that understanding an endgame setup can be challenging for new players, so I will do my best to explain it clearly. Let's start with the class and skill choices. I'm using a mix of Exorcist, Adept and Hashashin. In the Exorcist class, we combine the Seeker Talisman with Pressure Point to create Acupuncture. It's a projectile based attack that deals poison damage. While it may not be the strongest attack in the game, it has a high number of charges and pushes enemies, including bosses, back, which greatly enhances survivability. Next we have Exorcise, which we mainly use to reduce enemies' resistances. I'm using Summon Guardian as a free attack skill. It's a projectile based attack, even though it's technically a minion. I will explain the layout later, but to mention it briefly, it gets triggered by our movement skills, which we have 2 of, and from our crits, so it will be active all the time, without it needing to be slotted in our skill bar. Lastly, in Exorcist, we have Mandala, which I transform into Battle Aura. This gives us increased skill and base damage, and it also redirects some damage from our health to our mana, providing a great defensive buff. And we can easily keep it active with our movement skills, crits, and kills. For class bonuses, I'm using Near Death Experience, which has saved me many times by removing all inflictions and providing absorption. Feedback Loop is essential for the huge increase in MP steal and the chance that triggered skills won't use a charge. Lastly, I'm using Fear for its defensive benefits and movement speed boost, but you could easily replace it with Sixth Sense or Hex, since our Acupuncture and Exorcise are both infliction based, so Hex will provide a decent benefit. In the Adept class, we have Warp, which we combine with Shroud of Darkness to create shadow clones. These clones act as buffs rather than minions, but they still benefit from minion multipliers, allowing you to have more of them active at once. They mimic your attacks, which means you can trigger several attacks like Monsoon at the same time. Another great benefit is as long as one clone is alive, it will take your place if your character dies. I have shadow clones on the skill bar, but I mainly trigger them with our skill modifiers. I have already mentioned the Battle Aura and Acupuncture earlier. The final Adept skill is a combination of Waspul and Dervish, which creates Monsoon. This skill pulls enemies towards it, while dealing massive damage per second. And we again of course have several ways to trigger it passively. In the Adept class, we are utilizing 4 class bonuses. Third Eye will teleport you away if you would take fatal damage, making it one of the strongest defensive passives in the game and essential for high level Hellgates. Telekinesis allows you to reflect enemy projectiles. Mystic Arts helps you to regain skill charges with basic attacks, and Disperse increases our AoE damage capability. In the Hashashin class, we are using Dashing Strike as our second movement ability, alongside the basic roll. This helps us to avoid damage, and of course it triggers this skill modifier. I have already talked about Monsoon. Next we have Poison Vial, which is a projectile based poison attack, like Acupuncture. The poisonous patches it creates deal ridiculous damage per second and can really melt bosses. While I trigger it passively, I also keep it on my skill bar, so I can target elite and boss enemies directly. Lastly we have Shadow Clones, which I have already mentioned. For passives we have Nothing Personal, which increases our crit damage, and we use Chain Kill, which provides us healing and mana. We have enough points to use another passive here, but it would require replacing an existing one. If you feel you have enough cooldown reduction, or you find Hex or Fear on hit unnecessary, then consider replacing it with Finisher, Inconspicuous or Counter. Now for the layout. I'm using a cross pattern to maximize the benefits from triggers for as many skills as possible. Important to note is that you can combine skills only horizontally and not vertically. My two main attacks, Monsoon and Acupuncture, are centered to give them as many benefits as possible. The Shadow Clones and Battle Aura buffs don't need as many skill modifiers, so they are positioned on the left corner, where they still have access to our trigger skills. Exorcise is on the right side. I'm not that interested in buffing it too much. I primarily want it to trigger passively. And of course, if we can get benefits, like a chance that the triggered skill doesn't use charges on the way, then that's awesome. I put Dashing Strike up here, so it cannot be triggered by any effect, as that would take away control over your character's movement direction. And while it's here, it can still get the benefits from skill modifiers like the skill charge increase. This layout allows me to place my passives on the right side, both at the bottom and few at the top, ensuring that they don't interfere with the benefits to my main skills. Before I discuss the stats and items, let me explain how the build works. We trigger our skills both actively and passively, which consume skill charges and mana. We replenish skill charges through cooldown on hit modifiers on our items and skills. This effect only triggers from our base attacks, so you need to use them to refill your skill charges quickly. We gain mana simply by dealing damage, with the biggest increase coming from Feedback Loop. As long as we are dealing any type of damage, our mana will remain full. The active effects from Monsoon and Poison Vial help significantly, as they deal damage every second. Our damage primarily comes from skills, so we want to maximize skill damage as much as possible. Cast speed is also very beneficial, since it allows us to spam skills like Acupuncture much faster. But don't confuse cast speed with attack speed. Attack speed only affects our base attack. However, we also want attack speed, because it helps us to trigger the cooldown on hit effect more frequently. For defenses, you definitely want to maximize your resistances. The best way to do this is by looking for items and glyphs that provide the elemental resistance stat, rather than individual resistances. Additionally, aim to get some avoidance and block. Be sure that you have enough accuracy, so your attacks can't be avoided by enemies, and also aim for a high critical chance for the significant damage multiplier, and of course for triggering our skill effects. We aren't interested in minion stats, except for increasing the number of minions, allowing us to have more Shadow Clones. Monsoon is ice based, and Acupuncture and Poison Vial is poison based, so I have increased the elemental damage the most. And we definitely want a high amount of elemental chance, since this will help to trigger the elemental effects like poisoned or freezing enemies. The MP steal I already talked about. The one thing that I would like to be higher in this build is HP steal. The next thing I will try to do is to reroll the HP gained per kill to the HP steal stat. And lastly, because we have several projectile skills, we of course want to get benefits like projectile pierce, increase projectiles, and so on. Now you know which stats to look for, which brings me to the glyphs I recommend. Alassa for critical chance, skill damage, and projectile pierce, Nasin for attack and cast speed plus cooldown reduction on hit, Weka for numerous benefits to our projectiles, and Moku for HP gain and block speed. I haven't finished fine-tuning my items yet, and they aren't fully enchanted, but here is a look at what I'm using. I recommend using talismans or a bow, since most of our attacks are already ranged, and it makes it of course also easier to stay alive. You want to socket all 4 types of elements in your weapon, so we can trigger all effects. But the most important one is ice, since it can freeze enemies in place, giving you even more survivability. In my shield I also socketed 1 gem of each type for the resistances. In my scarf and hat, I'm using mostly skill charge gems, since the increases in HP and mana aren't significant after level 50. And lastly, the amulet can't have gems. I just want to mention quickly an alternative setup. If you don't like to play with acupuncture and would rather play with Seeker Talismans and Pressure Point, the only thing you have to do is move the Pressure Point to here. And you can consider moving the trigger on kill to here, if you want your Seeker Talismans to benefit from it. So let me show you more gameplay now.